really want you to go, hey, everyone deserves attention and love and care. And so that means I also deserve it. And how can I give that to myself without outsourcing it? And I think a lot of
Mhm.
us outsource the things we can give ourselves. And this is why we find ourselves in relationships that might not be very healthy, because we're expecting our partners or our friends to do things for us that we should be doing for ourselves.
Yeah.
And so that's a different topic, but I think it's incredibly important to just be aware that you're worth everything that anyone else is worth, and that it should be a priority, and you are your own responsibility. No one else is
Mhm.
as responsible for you as you are for yourself. And so if you don't do it, who will?
So, hello and welcome to Blending and Mending. I was saying to our guest when I saw her face pop up on screen, I had an absolute fan moment. So, for our viewers and our listeners, we've got Dr. Sara Kuburic on the line. She is an author, she is a speaker, she is a therapist. And for me, she's just someone who is so relatable. And I'm absolutely humbled, Sara, to have you on the call.
Oh, what an introduction. No, I am so excited to chat. We've wanted to make this work for so long, and I was not going to give up on it. And here I am, and I'm so excited to talk about all the important things that we as humans go through.
Absolutely. So, just to give context, so I reached out to your team, I think it was in January, February, and I got a response. Like I was saying to Sara earlier, I had to double check that I read the response correctly. So, this has been in the making since the beginning of the year. And Sarah's taking the call from Serbia. So, the universe is
Mhm.
aligned. We're on the call today. So, again, Sarah is just so chuffed.
Thank you. I'm very excited too.
So, for listeners or viewers, Sara, who maybe don't know you as the millennial therapist or the work that you do, just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, for sure. So, hi, I'm Sara. I'm often known as the Millennial Therapist, which is actually the
Mhm.
handle of my Instagram account that I started several years ago and did not think would go anywhere or do anything. But here we are. It kind of became my name. And I'm an existential psychotherapist, which means I practice from the modality of existentialism, which is a philosophy. Um, and I specialize in identity, in moral trauma, and in relationships. So maybe that's enough. I'm always like, what do I share? What do I say?
That's beautiful. And I think if I look at your Instagram profile, Sara, and I'll
Mm,
share very vulnerably, I was drawn to your posts and authenticity with how you use your words to really relate and resonate with people. I mean, I stumbled across a post in a space of life that felt darker than it should. And I just remember thinking, hold on, she gets it. This is
mm.
normal. This is okay. So, if we
Oh,
tap into the work that you do in terms of meaning, relationships, the who am I, why is that
mhm.
work so meaningful for you?
Yeah, so I think existentialism is a scary thing. People go, okay, I understand existentialism as a bunch of old dead men from France or Germany that had really, really sad things to say about humanity, and it wasn't very hopeful or peppy. And I understand that you're a therapist, but how have you managed to combine them two? And that's why I like existential therapy, because I think it asks all the questions. And the really difficult ones, like why do I even exist and who am I? And he
Mhm.
doesn't shy away from the grayness of life. I think a lot of therapy or a lot of self-help or a lot of that movement is very solution focused, and we categorize and we have these very definitive answers, which feel comforting. But what I liked about this particular sort of worldview truly is that it lets you just be in the discomfort,
Mhm.
without being consumed by it, without feeling threatened by it. So, learning how to navigate the answers that you don't have. And I think, as someone who, had a pretty unusual upbringing, at least unusual in comparison to a lot of my friends growing up in Canada, I lived through two wars by the age of 9. And by the time we immigrated to Canada, I didn't have the same reference points or interest as my 9 or 10-year-old friends. They were watching TV and reading books that I was not interested in because I didn't feel like it reflected the things that I experienced. And my biggest thought wasn't about my crush in my fifth grade, it was
Hmm.
about processing what I just sort of encountered. And so I started reading a lot of existential sort of literature without even realizing it. And so I started reading Dostoevsky when I was like 11 or 12, because the way he perceived the world, the way he was asking questions really resonated. And that arguably is a red flag. But, uh, in Serbia, it's not so much because it's part of their, I think, high school education. Everyone reads Dostoevsky. And so it's
Okay.
really interesting. I think it was a part of the cultural kind of upbringing. It was a part of my life experience. And then it just ended up being the most relatable way to understand the world and human suffering. And so that's how I landed into sort of asking these questions and practicing from this particular modality.
That's incredible. I do need to
Mhm.
ask, when you say you lived through two wars, what do you mean by that?
So I was born in Bosnia right before the Bosnian War. And then we
Okay.
went to Serbia, and there was the Kosovo War, and then the bombings in '99. And so the NATO bombings is something that I remember the most, obviously. But I think that that really shaped the way that I saw the world or myself. And I think obviously there was a lot of trauma surrounding that, and lack of
Hmm.
distrust in humanity, and a lot of questions about humanity. I think when I first started studying psychology, if I'm being perfectly honest, it didn't start off from being like, I just want to help people. Really, it was, I want to understand people. I think I was so confused for so long of like, how can something like that unfold? Why are we okay with hurting each other as humans? And what is
Yeah.
more important than human life? I think I just really wanted to understand what made people tick. And so when I first started kind of studying, it was really just feeding my curiosity and making sense of my own experiences. And then eventually that evolved into like, hey, I can make a difference. And what does that look like for me? So that was kind of part of my journey.
That's profound. I mean, I've got this image of you as this little girl, 11, 12 years old, so preteen, reading these books, just thinking about life so differently, right? It's
Yeah.
incredible.
Like
I
it's
was
like
gonna,
in retrospect, you're like, wow, that's really cool. And then you're like, but that's a very lonely experience in terms of like, who am I discussing what I'm reading with, and who else is relating? So I think that that was like
yeah.
a cool experience, but definitely an isolating one when I was
Hmm.
a preteen.
And that space of relatedness, that's the big gap.
Mm,
And I think we all have a story to tell. We've all gone through some sort of a narrative throughout life, things that give us our essence, our meaning, some potentially being a little bit braver in terms of finding that fulfillment. But it's that space of relatedness that drew me to your account. And it's the reason for
mm,
our topic today. So, blending and mending, and I've shared with other podcast guests, was really born from a space of hurt. Um, Went through my divorce 5 years ago, had my little
mm,
2 year old with me, and I remember making the decision, not leaving a marriage where there was abuse, where there was violence or anything like that. We were just two people on autopilot. And I always say we maybe didn't know how to love each other the way we needed to love each other anymore.
mm,
And I remember having those questions and mirror moments, thinking, is this it? Is this
mm,
what life is going to look like? And it was hard, Sarah, to step out of that space, make this big, brave decision that goes against societal norms, religious norms. Your family's looking
mhm,
at you saying, Chantal, you've been raised in a Christian home, you don't do this. And I
mhm,
missed the space of relatedness. I didn't have anyone in that time of life who got what I was going through. And it was through finding accounts like yours through my journey where I just realized, okay, this is okay. It's okay to choose myself. It's okay to be happy for me because that's going to
mm,
transcend to my daughter. So, part of the topic that I wanted to unpack with you and that I've been seeing more and more of with clients is You go through the separation, you go through the divorce process, and life kicks into that practical overdrive. It's figuring out, where is my home going to be? Because now I have to leave
Hmm.
the home that I've known for years and built as a chapter of my life. I need to figure out if the kids are staying in school or if we're moving schools. I have to figure out a budget. And it's these practical steps that you need to follow because you're in a space of absolute and utter survival.
Yeah.
What I find people are saying is I've lost my essence. I don't know.
Mm.
I don't know who I am if I'm not in my marriage. I don't know who I am if I'm not in this relationship. And I now need to focus on my kids. They need to be okay. I need to normalize this for them. What would you say is one of the reasons or some of the reasons that we go from ongoing survival and almost click into that space as autopilot versus adding on that we need to focus on ourselves to find ourselves again? I think
Yeah.
people miss that self-discovery step and they get so focused on getting through day to day that they forget about themselves in the process.
Absolutely. So the listeners might not know, but I've also been divorced. Actually, I don't know if you know that, but
I
I
actually
have.
listened to a podcast where you
Okay,
discussed
you
that.
did.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I surprise. No. And I think obviously having children makes that incredibly more. It makes it more difficult. I can't even imagine what it would have been like to try to normalize that or be stable for someone else while the whole
Hmm.
situation was very disorienting and um, lacked grounding, I think, to some extent. So I think the reason why we don't have the shift or we kind of ignore the self discovery during this process is because we don't realize that our survival is threatened by
Hmm.
our lack of authenticity. So we don't understand, like, we're going, okay, I need to pay for rent. Okay, I need to do whatever X, Y, and Z. Okay, I need to appease my family. I need to do this. I need to do that. That's really important for me to feel safe and for me to feel stabilized and for me to have an existence. And what we don't understand is the self loss, I think, is one of the most threatening things we can experience. And so I think it's just lack of value. We don't see it as part of survival, but I would argue it's a really large part of our actual survival, the essence. It is the essence that we're not protecting. We're protecting our physical body, so we have somewhere to live,
Hmm.
which obviously for many of us or all of us should be the priority. But I think we just don't fully understand the risk to which we're exposing ourselves by not sort of doing the whole self discovery, and that's why it doesn't become a priority. And I get it, and we're not taught that your essence is something that you need to be protecting all the time. We're not taught that
Hmm.
if you don't have that, you're not going to like your life regardless. You're not going to want to live your life regardless of how quote unquote good it is. And so I think a lot of why that shift is so hard is that we just don't take it very seriously, and it seems like something that we can push and something that won't impact us or our children. But in reality, I think becoming who you want to become and the version of you that feels aligned and fulfilling is going to be the best gift you can give your child. It's probably going to be a
Hmm.
better gift than the tennis lessons you're getting them. So if you can't afford both, maybe go to therapy, and they won't have the tennis lessons, but they're going to have a parent who can model authenticity and responsibility and choice, decision making. And so I think that's a little bit where it's um, where the problem ensues, if you will.
Hmm. You mentioned there that we're not taught, right,
Hmm.
to almost have those conversations and to put ourselves first in these situations.
Yeah.
And I think often we're raised that you can't be selfish. You need to think about other people before you think about yourself. In South Africa, we've got a beautiful concept from Nelson Mandela called Ubuntu. So
Hmm.
it's about others. It's about the broader
Mm.
community. But when it comes to this type of healing, it's about you. It's about your journey. It's about your self-discovery. What is that permission we need to give ourselves to allow
Mm.
ourselves to focus on ourselves? What is that?
I think understanding that you matter as much as everyone else.
Mm.
and it's also understanding that you can't serve others if you're empty. Like you can't pour from an empty cup. When you go on flights, they always say put your own oxygen mask first before helping
Yes.
someone put it on. And these are really practical examples of like you need to be okay in order to give to serve. And look, I think service is beautiful. I think service inherently gives people meaning and connection. And I think that we should take care of each other more than we are. And yet, I think in order to do that, we need to take care of ourselves. I really think it's
Yeah.
one end. I think there's so many extremes where it's just community or it's just individuals or individualized sort of mindset where it's like it's all just about you and you need to make sure it's okay. And, that's your only responsibility. And I don't agree with that either. I think you need to be responsible for yourself and others. And the best way to
Hmm.
be responsible for others is sometimes taking care of yourself. And so, if that helps someone be motivated to take care of themselves, great. But I don't even think you need to. I don't think you should be like, well, this is the best way I can help others, because then again, it's very other focused. I really want you to go, hey, everyone deserves attention and love and care. And so that means I also deserve it. And how can I give that to myself without outsourcing it? And I think a lot of
Hmm.
us outsource the things we can give ourselves. And this is why we find ourselves in relationships that might not be very healthy, because we're expecting our partners or our friends to do things for us that we should be doing for ourselves.
Yeah.
And so that's a different topic, but I think it's incredibly important to just be aware that you're worth everything that anyone else is worth, and that it should be a priority, and you are your own responsibility. No one else is
Hmm.
as responsible for you as you are for yourself, and so if you don't do it, who will? And I think you have this one life and you might as well take care of yourself as you live it.
Yeah. It's the one life. It's about, again, I keep using the word fulfillment because that was such a big part of my journey 5 years ago, is
Mm-hmm.
feeling that empty cup, feeling life in autopilot, and not being kind to myself in terms of what I really wanted from life. Um, Sarah, often what I hear people speak about is it's the identity that's wrapped up in the other person.
Mm-hmm.
So it's identity that's wrapped up in the day you put on that ring. I have now become a
Mm-hmm.
Mrs. ABC.
Mm-hmm.
It's the identity of being that person's wife, husband, partner. It's the identity of being a mother. The day your marriage or relationship ends, there is a disconnect.
Mm-hmm.
And I find people struggle to still be true to themselves in terms of, again, finding that essence versus living into the title of Mrs. Who am I without a ring? And getting very lost and confused in that space of what life was versus what life could be or should be. What are some of the
Mm-hmm.
practical steps people can put in place to help them transition from, yes, I used to be a Mrs., yes, I used to
Mm-hmm.
have a ring on my finger, but
Mm-hmm.
today I'm me. I show up as a
Mm-hmm.
woman, I show up as an individual, and this is what I want for myself. How do we take those first steps?
Yeah, I think sometimes it's just writing down the beliefs you have surrounding these topics. So, what does it mean to be married? What does a
Mm-hmm.
ring represent? What um, do you have to mourn in terms of what are the things you're losing? Maybe you really liked the title of Mrs. Maybe that was like a goal of yours or a dream of yours since you were a little kid. Maybe you come from a broken home and you were really hoping you can have your own relationship to kind of repair and restore um, something that was so broken while you were growing up. And so I just think
Mm-hmm.
seeing all the things that were really tangled up. So what does it mean not to be married? What does it mean to be a woman in your 30s or 40s and raise a child by yourself? What does it mean? And I think it's so important to go through all the emotions. And what we often find is a sense of shame, a sense of guilt,
Mm-hmm.
a sense of confusion, anger, um, and just really seeing, why aren't you leaning into this new identity? What is preventing you from grasping it and embodying it? And it's often because there's something about it or your beliefs about it that you do not like. And so I think that's a really great tangible first step of like, what does it mean
Hmm.
for me to now be single? And what are all the things that are coming up for me and all the beliefs and expectations, and maybe they're unrealistic, that I need to kind of deconstruct before I can really lean into it. And I think you said something
Hmm.
twice that was really wonderful. Individuals who just leave because it's not enough, I think sometimes struggle more. They don't have
Hmm.
the quote unquote excuse.
Reason. Yep.
They don't have the reason. It's like, my husband didn't yell at me. My husband didn't hit me. My husband didn't, hide food or resources from me. And those are like acceptable reasons to leave a husband, for example. When you go, I just wasn't feeling it, and not that that's how it is, but it's like, I just wasn't. I looked at my life and I went, this can't be all it is, and we're not connected, and I feel like I want something different. And just, that is so hard for people, at least in my practice. That's what I found. It is so hard for individuals to then go, okay, I'm leaving because I want something better. What does that even mean? And I think there's like an extra layer of like, I'm not leaving a really toxic situation and now I can, be proud of myself and have support. Often those individuals think they might be entering into a worse phase in their life where they're financially
Hmm.
more stressed, and and then they don't have people that support them as much as they're going through something like that, because it feels more like a personal choice and people have lots of opinions about it. And so I just wanted to point that out, that if that's you, and I would say I was more in that camp, so maybe that's why I have the empathy that I do for it. It's there's going to be an extra layer of like really examining what it means that you left this marriage. Like, you made a vow and now you broke it. And what does that mean for you? And so just really exploring your feelings about it is important before you can really implement any action. Not sure that was super practical, but we're getting there.
I relate to every single word because that is literally my life summarized over that period of time. You did share that you relate to that. That was part of your
Mm,
journey. How did you cope through that? Those feelings of aloneness, feeling like people around you don't understand, and that guilt, because guilt is something I think a lot of people struggle with.
yeah. I think what helped me was understanding the existential threat.
Okay.
I think I was so miserable and empty and numb that it was almost like I was dead, truly. Like, there, and I think I would have done anything to make that stop, because he was like, okay, you're dead. So do you want to, ironically, exist in the state of nothingness? Or do you want something? And I think the pain of the nothingness became so
Hmm.
severe that I was willing to burn any bridge, make any change. And I think I was young. I was in my mid 20s. I was like, I'm way too young to be feeling this. Like, this can't
Hmm.
be it. This can't be my life. And I think what
Hmm.
helped me was understanding that I'm not going to live for other people. So I've had, you know, um, kind of a record of a track record of doing the right things. So went to college super early, went to grad school super early, got married to, who people thought I should marry. I was part of my community. I acted and dressed a certain way. And I got all the pats on the back,
Hmm.
amazing, from my social community to my religious community, whatever. It was all great. And then I realized that that's the unhappiest I've ever been. And I am now exactly who they wanted me to be, but it's not who I am or who I want to be. And I think just having that taste of like, oh, I've done it right and I'm still unhappy, motivated me to do it wrong.
Hmm.
Because I can't live my life for you. I can't. You can think that I should marry this person, but I'm the one that has to wake up to them every day. You
Absolutely.
might think that, you know what I mean? Like, you might think that I should be dressing this way or doing that, but I'm the one that has to wear the clothes. I'm the one that has to present. And so I just kind of snapped in that moment and went, I'm no longer going to do it for others. I'm going to do it for me. And if it's wrong and if it's messy and if I keep altering it and changing it, I'm okay with that. But as long as it belongs to me. So it came from
Hmm.
like this need for survival, this need to get close to my own existence, because he felt so far away from me. And so, yeah, that's what helped with the feelings of guilt and shame and everything else that came with it.
Mm-hmm. You touched on doing things the right way.
Mm.
And I remember a conversation with my mom over that time, and she said to me, "You've always done well academically. You've always been such a success in
Mhm.
anything you put your mind to. How could you walk away from your marriage? How do you not make this part of life work too?" And
Mhm.
there was a switch in me though, Sarah. I think when I had made the decision to leave, it was that was the first real decision I'd really made for me. And I was in this space of bravery.
Mhm.
Everyone said I was brave. I don't know if it's the right word, but I remember just feeling, you're with me or if you're not with me. But I'm doing this for myself and I'm doing this for my daughter. And that was the only motivation I needed to navigate that life. And it was lonely. I mean, I think it was over a year. I didn't have contact with family, handful of friends. And it's easy then to jump back to, did I make the right decision? But
Totally.
it's the incongruence of how you are as an individual when you're in that space versus the lift of relief you feel when you're out and you can be your true self. Is that harsh to say that?
No, love it. I'm glad you said it, not me, but no, but I think it's so true. And I think for me, I developed kind of a panic disorder during that time, right before I decided to leave my
Okay.
marriage. And it was really interesting that I would notice how that would flare up. And eventually my therapist is like, I don't think it's going to change until you distance yourself and you alter the way your life is right now. And I think the fact that my panic attacks and anxiety attacks went away after I, changed a lot of things in my life, including my marriage. It wasn't just my marriage, but that speaks volume. And so I think,
Mhm.
again, I almost kind of had it easier because panic attacks, by the way, would never, ever, ever wish it upon anyone. But it was such a clear sign. And then the absence of them, I was like, whoa. And then I would come closer and they would flare up. And it was almost just my body being like,
Okay.
nope, you're done with that. And so that was, yes, the relief, but for me, it was also like my body was so clearly and so loudly communicating with me for years, because my panic attacks
Mhm.
last for a long time, until I finally changed everything I needed to change. It was a really remarkable experience and kind of a bonding experience with my body in the end, although I was horrified by it at the start. But yeah, for me, it was, I had this like actual compass in my body. And it was like, nope, too close. Nope, you shouldn't be doing
Mhm.
that. And just panic attacks every time something wasn't authentic. Wild experience.
So interesting. And again, just how tuned in everything actually is if we pay attention to it.
Yeah.
This might lead me then into our next question. And I want to lift this because I think often we're constantly hearing, especially on social media, be kind to yourself, be brave, know your
Hmm.
worth. And I think a lot of those messages have become so diluted because it's shared in so many different contexts. But what I do want to lift with you, Sarah, is if people don't stay congruent to who they really are, their worth, their value, their
Yeah.
meaning, what is the risk of that if they don't listen to what they genuinely and authentically need? What could happen then?
Yeah. I mean, it depends. You can create a super inauthentic version of yourself. A lot of people will become numb or start to self medicate. And I use that
Mm-hmm.
broadly, but drinking, Netflix, whatever, you're numbing yourself out. You're not truly existing to cope with this version of you. And I think one of the more painful ones, which is, the term I introduced in my book, was self-loss. And that is such a painful experience of not knowing at all. I remember having this moment looking in the mirror and just not recognizing the person and not recognizing my life and not
Mm-hmm.
recognizing the decisions I was making. And I think it's scary to live with a stranger. Think about literally living with a stranger. It's uncomfortable. You don't feel safe. There's no intimacy. You're always on guard. And that's sometimes how we feel about ourselves. And so for me, I think that is the experience of like being so disconnected that you have no fulfillment in your life. And I honestly can't think of anything worse than not having fulfillment in your life and just going sleepwalking. I think that's the ultimate. You're sleepwalking.
Yeah.
And, when people don't have meaning, we also know that there is increased potential for suicide. Like, there's increased potential for depression. There's a lot increased potential for anxiety. So there are mental health implications that sometimes come. And I think that's why I'm such an advocate to talk about the question of who am I? Because I think sometimes it can help with preventatively in terms of mental health. And sometimes I do think that anxiety and depression and all that can just be symptomatic of truly some more existential questions.
Absolutely. So let's chat about your book. So it's definitely something I
Yeah.
want to get my hands on. But tell us about the book again, just the essence of that for you, and then where in South Africa can we get a copy?
Good question.
I'll
So
Google if you don't know.
I will, yeah, I will have to ask my team. Maybe Kindle. I'm guessing maybe on
Okay.
Kindle you
Yes, we
can,
do have Kindle.
or you could do shipping, which I'm not sure would be the most affordable thing in the world, but probably possible. I don't think South Africa bought rights yet that I remember, but
Okay.
I can check. Um, so my book is about self-loss. It's that feeling of being completely disconnected from who you are. And it's not just like, I talk about how authenticity or, being inauthentic is kind of like deep diving. And so you're deep diving in the darkness and you're being inauthentic with your actions and your words and all that good stuff. But you always know where the surface is. You go, okay, when I need to take my next breath, when I need to fill my lungs with life, I know exactly where to go. And so it feels less threatening. Yes, you're doing things you shouldn't be. You're saying yes when you want to say no, all that stuff. But you know where the reference point is. You know who you want to be and you know how to get there. Self loss is like deep diving and understanding you're running out of breath and you're just tumbled in the waves underwater and you have no idea where the surface is.
Sure.
And yet you know that you need to breathe. And so you're like, I need to start swimming. But if I swim in the wrong direction, that can ultimately kill me. Or if I swim in the right direction, I might make it in time to take my next breath. That's kind of the feeling of self-loss. It's so much further, it's so much more intense than just like not being true to yourself. It is, you've done this for so long, and maybe it's because something traumatic happened, maybe it's because that was modeled to you, maybe that's because of what society is expecting, but you at this point have no reference. You don't know how to answer questions like, what do you want, what do you prefer, what do you need, what are your morals, what are your values, and you feel very, very scared. A lot of people feel very scared in that state, because, again, they're looking at a stranger. And so the book is about how to identify self-loss if you're experiencing it, how it impacts your life, why does it happen in the first place? And then the second half of the book is kind of about creating your sense of self. I'm very adamant about not finding your sense of self, because I feel like when you find things, that means they already exist. But how can your
Oh,
essence
wow.
exist without your permission or without your participation? Where does it come from? So this is where I distinguish between essentialism and existentialism. It's a little nerdy, but it's a short section. But I'm an advocate that you create yourself. And the essence that you have is kind of a manifestation or a consequence of your decisions and the way you use your freedom. And so responsibility is a really huge theme throughout the book. It's why it's called It's on Me. And I think it's one of hope. It's saying, okay, if you don't like who you are in this moment, if you don't like your life as is, the great news is that you can change it. Because you're not determined to be any one thing. You can be anything you want, and whatever you want to become, that might even change. Who you want to be in your 30s might change when you're 60. And I think that that's really great. And I think the self is not static. I think it's fluid. So there's a lot of narratives that I try to kind of debunk and deconstruct when it comes to what is the self, because I think
Sure.
the self is really important. Now I've told you everything in the book. You don't need to read it.
I'm absolutely getting a
Yeah.
copy. While you're talking, I've got this vision of just all these pieces of life, almost seaweed, because you spoke about the sea, right? But all the
Mm-hmm.
seaweed that's just pulling you down. And it's about untangling all of those pieces to get to where you need to get to. And when you get there, it's this new chapter you can write for yourself, and you can own every single word.
I love that. Yeah, I love that you say you can own every single word. For me, it's like I'm happy to make mistakes. I just want them to be
Mm,
mine. Like I'm happy to
100%.
cry. I'm happy to create something that's not good, but I want to be like, oh, that's still mine.
Hmm.
I don't want to be making mistakes that are not even mine. I feel like that's extra frustrating because like I didn't want to do this in the first place, and now I'm getting the consequences of it, and like I didn't even get to be intentional, and I get the like whatever the negative feedback or the criticism or whatever comes with it.
Hmm.
And so I think there's something really cool about owning your own life and something really liberating about that concept. And I don't think we as humans take enough responsibility on one hand,
Oh,
and then yet
spot on.
yeah, and then at the same time I think we sometimes take existence too seriously, as in like it's okay to be playful and to make mistakes.
Just maybe then, in terms of us winding to the end of the
Yeah.
podcast, what are some of the words of wisdom that you could share? If it's one or two things that someone really takes away from listening to this episode, what would
Mm.
that be?
I have two sort of statements that I try to live my life by, or something that's been kind of important to me. One is don't overcommit to any one version of yourself. I think this is when we become stagnant. And I think when we become stagnant, there's lack of life and lack of relevance. And so don't overcommit. It's okay if you change and grow, and don't let that scare you. You're always meant to be bigger and greater, and that's part of life. And then the second thing that I love is the statement I always say, which is your greatest success is not going to be what you accomplish, but who you become. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's something, it's like redefining what we mean by success. But I think when we are going through life, we always have competing values and priorities. And it's really important to realize that the thing you need to be guarding the most and paying most attention to is your sense of self. And I think that that then deprioritizes certain things and kind of changes the hierarchy of your life in a really meaningful way. And so I think instead of being like, I hope I make $10 million by the time I'm 50, I really hope that it's more like, hey, I hope I become a person that is self-aware and kind, and always stays true to their sense of morality. Like, to me,
Mm-hmm.
that's such a beautiful goal. And so I think instead of being like, I need this marriage to work under any circumstance, being like, what if above it was one that said, hey, I need to take care of myself, hey, I need to honor myself? Would then the goal of your marriage change, and what would that look like? So I
Mm-hmm.
don't know, and I'm not. I always say I'm never advising people to get a divorce just because I
Yeah.
did. I don't think that
Yeah.
that's
I'm the
that's
same.
the right thing. But if you had a priority that was focused on you, would your goal about your marriage change, and how would it change?
Hmm. Sara, you're a breath of fresh air. You've given us
Oh,
so much. Really,
I
it's
just
so.
rambled for an hour.
You did it.
I
It is.
apologize. Yeah.
It is so incredible speaking to someone. And again, it's how I felt reading your Instagram post. It's just someone who gets it, someone who comes from a space of there's no judgment. It's a space of relatedness and almost giving people who read your post the permission to feel how they're feeling. Because I think that's what we need sometimes. We just need the permission. It's been incredible. Thank you so, so much just for taking the
Thank
time. I'm so
you.
glad 4 months later we could get this in diaries. And I
Yay.
just wish you all the best. I really do.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This was so delightful. And as you said, really refreshing. I love when people share their own experiences. People are always too scared to. And I love that you brought your authentic self into the conversation. So I so deeply appreciate you and the work that you're doing. And thank you for having me.
Sara, thank you. Bye.